From tolerance to terror. I'm David Cott, host of New History of Spain, and today I'm bringing you the story of how and why gays went from being accepted in Classical Antiquity to suffering a harsh legal persecution in the Visigothic Kingdom. During the Republican era and the early Roman Empire, the concepts of heterosexuality and homosexuality, as we understand them today, did not exist. And the gender of the person you made love with was not as important as whether you were the active or passive partner. Being penetrated was considered characteristic of women, young boys, and slaves. It was a sign of weakness and therefore something despicable, while being active and penetrating another was deemed worthy of every free and adult man. In the 3rd and 4th centuries, a new sexual ethic began to prevail in the Roman world. And not solely because of the rise of Christianity, as many people believe. Pagan religions also became more repressive regarding sexual matters, glorifying the control of sexual impulses and sex solely for reproductive purposes. Paul the Apostle condemned any homosexual behavior, whether active or passive, and his stance, along with the condemnation of homosexuality in Judaism, have been highly influential in how homosexuality has been viewed in much of the Christian world. So don't blame Jesus for that, because he wasn't really concerned about sexuality. The rise of sexual rigorism in general, and Christian views on sexuality in particular, led to the disapproval of any type of sexual relationship merely for pleasure without reproductive purposes. Thus, sex between men was doomed to be persecuted. As Christianity gained followers and the power of the church grew, social and moral disapproval transitioned to legal persecution of gays in the late Roman Empire, even to the point of condemning them to death by burning in the Byzantine Empire of Justinian. Since there is a clear continuity between the Roman Empire and the post-Roman barbarian kingdoms like the Visigothic Kingdom, it is not surprising that the same sexual morality of the late Roman Empire was maintained in the Visigothic Kingdom. You may have noticed that I have spoken about same-sex relationships between men, but I have not said anything about lesbian relationships. The reason for this absence is that female homosexuality was not legally persecuted in either the late Roman Empire or the Visigothic Kingdom. This lack of persecution of lesbian relationships was not because women didn't love each other romantically and sexually. For instance, Augustine of Hippo criticized in 423 a community of religious women because they had carnal relationships instead of showing their love for each other spiritually. Although evidence is scattered, we have more information about lesbian relationships throughout antiquity and the Middle Ages, and Christian theologians like Thomas Aquinas included them as sins or crimes against nature. But why weren't lesbians persecuted? Men were more under pressure to show their virility, and they had to keep their honor. And if a single or married woman had sexual relationships with another woman, that didn't affect a man's pride. Nowadays, many men mistakenly wouldn't feel threatened if their girlfriend was bisexual and had sex with another woman, as if that was harmless and they couldn't lose their girlfriend because of that. And that kind of same mentality was present in late antiquity. But the main reasons for the lack of legal persecution against lesbians were the invisibility of women in society, the fact that sex between women didn't lead to a misuse of semen, and women weren't even considered to be able to have an active sexuality, since, as I have explained, only the one who penetrated another person was regarded as active in classical and late antiquity. But back to homosexual relationships between men. In the middle of the 7th century, King Chindasuinth of the Visigothic Kingdom of Iberia promulgated a law against gays. It was included in the Liber Judiciorum, a very influential legal code that continued to be used by Christians of the Iberian Peninsula throughout the medieval period. The law 3.5.4 has the title On Dishonest Acts Between Men, and the law displays a strong repulsion towards male homosexuality, as it qualifies sex between men as detestable, horrendous, or abhorrent. Notably, this law didn't differentiate between actives and passives, unlike Roman laws. Gay relationships were considered an illicit act punished by castration, meaning the men involved had their testicles cut off. Ouch! This cruel punishment already had precedents in the late Roman and Byzantine legislation, and castration was meant to take from the active partner the part of the body with which he committed the crime, and take from the passive the virility he had renounced. The only way one could avoid the punishment was if he had been raped or induced against his will, and if the victim had denounced the act. After that, the condemned men would have to serve a harsh penance under the supervision of the bishop of the region where the act happened. Despite the bishop's involvement in this law, it is true that the text does not reference Christian morality for this legal condemnation, unlike the Byzantine law of Justinian where this was emphasized. Chindasuinth was a king who took measures against the lay aristocracy and the church to reduce their power, and exercising more control over the bodies of the people was a way of centralizing and legitimizing his power. In addition to affecting the condemned individual, the punishment for having sex with another man also had repercussions for his family, if he had a wife and children. The wife could receive her entire dowry back and remarry freely, which is very relevant because marriage was seen as nearly indissoluble in the Catholic Visigothic Kingdom, while the offspring inherited all of their father's properties. Therefore, with this law, men who had homosexual relationships lost their genitals, were ostracized from society to serve penance, their marriages were dissolved, and they lost all their wealth. If you think that's bad enough, well, I gotta say that it gets worse, because things can always get worse. About 40 or 50 years later, at the 16th Council of Toledo in the year 693, the first synodal resolution against homosexuality was adopted, by express order of King Egica. Egica addressed the aristocrats and bishops assembled and said the following, quote, "You must decree the extermination of that obscene crime which is homosexuality, whose horrendous practices stain the grace of an honest life and provoke the wrath of the heavenly supreme avenger." End quote. This is the same king who advocated for the enslavement of all Jews. So, in the 20th century, he would have been pretty much Adolf Hitler. This disposition by Egica is quite different from the law of Chindasuinth, as the civil offense of Chindasuinth now took on a distinctly religious character with Egica, where now sex between men was not only an illicit and horrendous act, but a serious offense against God. Just as in the Visigothic Kingdom of the time the extermination of the Jews was sought, the extermination of homosexuals was advocated to protect the entire Catholic society from the potential collective punishment of God for these offenses. And indeed, references were made to the story of the destruction of Sodom as an example of what would happen if homosexuality was not persecuted. The Synodal Resolution of 693 distinguished between laymen and clerics, and to the punishments contemplated by the law of Chindasuinth, they added a lifelong exile from the Visigothic kingdom to both laymen and clerics. But for laymen, they also included 100 lashes and shaving one's head shamefully, similar punishments than those inflicted on traitors and rebels. But apparently, the council's law wasn't enough for Egica, and soon after that, he promulgated a new law that didn't distinguish between clerics and laymen. All gays, no matter their age, lineage, or profession, were sentenced to the same punishments, and the king could intervene in the trial. Egica's determination to eradicate homosexuality from his kingdom must be contextualized by the prevalent political theories of the time, in which a good Christian ruler had the duty to steer his subjects away from evil. And therefore, according to this view, Egica was fulfilling his responsibility to protect his people and his kingdom from evil. It is not known for certain why Chindasuinth legislated against homosexuals, but knowing the details of the text, it is clear that this condemnation is typical of the sexual morality of late antiquity. What we do know is that in the cases of both Chindasuinth and Egica, the condemnation of homosexuality occurred by royal initiative, and thus in this case, the cliché that it was the Catholic Church that lobbied against gays is debunked. In the case of King Egica, the reasons for his initiative against homosexuals, and generally against anything that seemed sinful, are clearer. Partly as a result of the expansion of the Sasanian Empire first, and the Arab Muslim conquests later, throughout the Christian Mediterranean, pessimistic and millenarianist views spread claiming that the return of Christ and the final judgment were near.
And winter is coming.
This idea of preparing for the final judgment and suddenly everyone becoming the most devout and orthodox believer is a cyclical phenomenon in both Christian and Islamic history. This millenarianist pessimism often appeared after natural disasters, epidemics, or even eclipses, as all these circumstances were believed to precede the end of times. In one thing they were right: the end of the Visigothic Kingdom was near. So, in summary, if you are gay in the Visigothic Kingdom, you are screwed. We're not just talking about stigmatization and social exclusion, but also about having your balls cut off, at the risk of dying from it, given the medical limitations of the time. And if you had a wife and children, your marriage ended, and all your possessions went to your family. And in the final years of the Visigothic Kingdom, if you were caught, you were also banished from the country, meaning basically everything you had was taken away, and your soul was supposed to burn eternally in hell. Thankfully, that doesn't happen anymore in the West, but remember that dark times can always come back, because history is not a linear progress. Moreover, there are countries where similar things happen to homosexuals in our time, and it's important to be aware of that and denounce anything that is against human freedoms. If you like this episode, please like, comment and subscribe, and if you love my work, consider a donation or joining my Patreon community for exclusive benefits. You can find the links in the description. Thanks for tuning in and see you soon!